Hello everyone, I'm Ella, a third year medical student, and this video will be your full guide on how to structure your revision for the UCAT, and I'll also be answering your questions on the exam. I will link my other UCAT video in the description box, which has an overview of each section, as well as my top tips for answering the questions. If this is your first video of me, I'm Ella, and I'm currently studying medicine in London. If you're interested in study tips, productivity, and insight into the life of a medical student, and more, then make sure you subscribe and like this video. Without any further ado, let's get started. The first section will be on how to structure your revision. I'm just going to be talking about the step-by-step process that I would recommend for you when you're starting your revision for the UCAT. There are many free resources for the UCAT exam, and I'm going to be linking some of them down in the description box, things like free practice questions, free overviews of each section, and mock tests. The website that I used for the UCAT was Medify, which I'm also going to be linking down, but I know there's other websites like 6med, MedEntry, etc. that you can also explore and see which one works best for you. Now, before you start, I just want to give you a quick overview of how to book your UCAT exam. So you would just go onto the UCAT website and type down book your UCAT exam, and you would have eligibility criteria, the key dates, etc., and registration and booking. You would then register for the UCAT, so it just has the steps. It's very straightforward to book the exam. You would create your account, and through your account you would then book the test. The test is usually £70 if it's taken in the UK, and if it's outside of the UK it's £115. I booked the exam and then I also rescheduled it to a bit later because I felt like I needed more time, so you can reschedule it as well, and you just have to look at the criteria for that. Okay, so moving on to the actual revision, how to structure your revision. The first thing that you should do when you're thinking about studying for the exam is to learn about the sections and read guides on what each section entails and what the UCAT exam as a whole entails. So things like the abstract reasoning, verbal reasoning, qualitative reasoning, etc. You need to start reading on each section and figure out what it's testing, what the question types are, and things like the timing of the exam. This information is usually available on all the practice question websites, and I'm also going to link down an information sheet from the Medic portal, which is very good and sums up a lot of information about the UCAT exam. Now, after you've read about each section and you've learned about the different question types, the next step is to start with doing untimed practice questions. And you can take as long as you want for each question. This is just about learning how to answer the questions and really understanding the question types. And this is the key to figuring out what works best for you and laying out like good solid foundations on how you're going to be approaching the questions. And the really important part of this is you have to look at the feedback after each question. And don't just look at why is the answer that I got wrong. Look at why is the right answer right, why are all the other answers wrong as well. So go through each option in the answers. In terms of how much time you should give yourself to study for the UCAT, I would recommend around 4 to 5 weeks, with 4 weeks being the minimum if you're really pushing yourself. This is the most optimum amount of time that you need to make sure that you get good scores and you're actually learning about how to answer the questions, etc., and you're giving yourself time to. So if we were to quickly just go through a sample calendar. Okay, so having mentioned the first few steps, let's just quickly look at a calendar so you can get more of a visual idea of how to structure your revision. So let's say your exam is on, for example, the 1st of September. How would you prepare your revision from the 1st of August to the 1st of September? Now, as we mentioned, the first few days you want to spend a bit of time just structuring, going through all the different sections, learning about them. So I would recommend maybe spend 2 days, 3 days max, but you want to get to the questions as soon as possible. So let's say you give yourself 2 days for this. And then after that, you want to spend a bit of time taking your time with the questions so that you actually learn how to go about answering them. So I would recommend you spend around 7 days, so around a week of doing that. So let's say you give yourself a week. I just wanted to preface that I'd recommend you don't spend more than 3 to 4 days max on untimed questions, so you can start practicing under time pressure as soon as possible. For just doing untimed practice questions. Now, after doing untimed practice questions, the next step after that is timed practice questions. And what I'd recommend with this is to leave the mock papers, leave the practice tests for a bit later. And with timed practice questions, I'm not sure if you can do this in all the websites for practice questions. Let me know in the comments down below. But what you could do in Medify was choose the number of questions you want and then set like an average time. So you could choose 55 questions and 13 minutes for the abstract reasoning, and it would give you around that amount of questions. And it was really helpful because because I wouldn't be using any of the mock tests. I felt like I wanted to save them for later. And if you can't do that with other websites, then just do mock tests as well, it's fine. And once again, after you finish the paper, you have to look through the feedback, look through every single question. Why did I get that right and why did I get that wrong? So looking at our timetable, this would take up the rest of your study period, and then you would alternate between doing timed practice questions and also practice tests and mocks. And this is where usually you'd see the most improvement in terms of your time management, your time efficacy. You would have this like click points. So I had this, for example, in abstract reasoning, where I would get really bad scores, and I think it was like 2 weeks before my exam day I then had a click sort of, and it started making sense. For verbal reasoning, for me it was a bit iffy. It was like a week before the exam, so obviously I was quite stressed about that. But you have to make sure that you don't give up and you just keep going, and at some point you will notice that I am starting to get the hang of this. Now, before we start with answering questions, I also wanted to mention a few tips that I had alongside with your revision that I think would be really helpful in taking in consideration. So my first tip, and I think this is the thing that made the biggest difference and helped me in getting 760 in my UCAT, was watching YouTube walkthrough videos. This is great, especially for the harder sections like abstract reasoning and verbal reasoning. Watch walkthrough videos. I'm gonna link down one YouTuber, I think he's called ML Eddie, and I really liked his walkthrough videos. They were really helpful in just seeing what his thought process was when answering questions. The next tip is to always look for patterns and tricks, especially for abstract reasoning. Whatever pattern you find, you need to write this down in a long list. So I made a long list of all the different patterns in abstract reasoning. Some of it was me adding things, and then others was just like a ready-made list that collated a lot of the patterns, and then I added some things to it. And I'll link it down in the description box as well. Use those as your guidelines for answering the questions. You'd realize that you're going to be picking up on the patterns in the questions way quicker. So this is something that is really helpful, especially for abstract reasoning. My third tip, and I think this is quite important, is to make sure that you're organizing your revision section by section, and that you're not just doing the sections that you think you're bad at and leaving the sections that you think you're good at. And I don't know if this makes sense, but the way I thought of it was you would have a baseline amount for each section. So for example, I will study each section 30 minutes every day, and then if you have one that you're worse at, then you would study it more, instead of making it so that the baseline and then whatever you're good at, you would study it less. If that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. And that just means that you won't be neglecting any section, because don't do my mistake. I thought I was good at the SJT because the first few mock tests I did fine in them. I got like band 1, and then so I kind of left it and I started focusing on all the other sections, and then come my exam day I end up doing really well in the other sections but getting band 3 in my SJT. So you want to make sure that you're not leaving any section behind. And finally, obviously closer to the exam day, start doing proper practice mock tests. So going through all the sections within the allocated time, so that you just practice the act of sitting down and focusing for a good 2 hours. So now let's move on to the questions. If you have any other questions that I haven't answered, please make sure you comment them down below and I'll make sure to answer them as well. First question that I got was, what is the structure of 2 hours revision? For example, how much of it was doing questions and how much was reviewing / watching videos? I would recommend that you wouldn't spend a lot watching videos at all. So even though I said walkthrough videos, etc. are really helpful, they shouldn't be taking more than 15-20 minutes of your revision max. You should be focusing on doing practice questions, etc. So I would recommend, if you have 2 hours allocated for the UCAT, then 15 minutes watching quick walkthrough videos, etc. And then the rest, like 1 hour 45 minute-ish, you would spend doing practice questions. The next question was how long and how much to practice, and also how to cope with the time pressure. So in terms of how long and how much to practice, I would recommend personally, because you're giving yourself like 4 weeks, let's say you've given yourself 4 weeks, I would recommend practicing around 2 to 3 hours a day for the first like 2 weeks-ish, and then closer to the exam day I would up it up to 4 to 5 hours a day. And this is where you would be doing your practice tests, your mock tests, etc. In terms of time pressure, these are some quick tips that I think helped in time efficiency. The first one is to make sure that you're memorizing basic math equations, and they need to be like really quick in your head. The second tip would be to make sure that you're practicing flagging and moving on. This is so important because easier questions are easier marks, harder questions are still 1 mark. Third one is to practice using the number pad. So if you have a number pad in your laptop, amazing, keep practicing using that. If you don't, then I'd recommend going to libraries, for example. You could even get like a small number pad and attach it to your laptop, or get like another keyboard to attach it to your laptop, but it definitely saves a lot of time using the number pad. Fourth thing is to practice using shortcuts as well for your laptop. So I'm going to be putting a few here on the screen, but these are all really helpful for just not wasting those precious sections. Basically anything that can save you you a few seconds is very, very important. Third question is 50 days enough time to practice from baseline 0? Yes, as I mentioned, I spent 4 to 5 weeks practicing for the UCAT, and I think that was more than enough. Other websites, other people recommend 6 to 8 weeks. I personally think that the problem with making it longer is that you're at the risk of burning out, and you don't want to be burning out just like a few days before the exam. So I thought that for me 4 to 5 weeks was like the sweet spot, but a lot of people say 6 to 8 weeks, or people say 6 weeks, 5 weeks. It's up to you and what works best for you. Next question was, how did your progress with the UCAT go? Were you doing well at the beginning, or was it bad, and did you gradually improve? So yeah, I definitely started out getting 500s etc in each section, and then slowly I managed to build up my way to my scores. And obviously, because you're starting from scratch, you're going to be doing really bad at the start, especially when you start doing timed questions as well. Guys, don't be afraid of getting like really low scores at the start, because you're not just balancing out how to answer the questions, but you're also balancing how to answer them in a few seconds or like in under a minute. It's very difficult to be getting good scores at the start. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that my improvement in the different sections varied. So some sections I found that I was improving way quicker. For example, I improved faster in qualitative reasoning just because I've always loved math, so like doing speed maths etc was funner. But other things like abstract reasoning, it took me way longer. Verbal reasoning was torture. It took me ages to start improving a bit. So different sections will vary based on what your weaknesses and strengths are. The next question is tips on how to study efficiently. The most important thing with studying for the UCAT exam is learning how to organize your time. So as we saw in the schedule that we made together, as well as that, like kind of giving yourself to-do lists for every single day and structuring your revision for every single day, that would be the best way to study efficiently. So that's it for answering the questions. If you guys have any other questions, please make sure to comment them down below. And I hope this video was helpful. Make sure you also check out my other UCAT video. It goes way more in depth into the actual sections themselves and my tips and tricks for each section. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!